Before the monocle and the cigarette holder, before the gap-toothed smile became synonymous with the bumbling British cad, Terry Thomas was Sergeant Thomas Terry Hoare Stevens of the Royal Corps of Signals, standing in the rain at a training depot in Yorkshire, wondering whether his dreams of stardom would ever survive the war. Thomas Terry Hoare Stevens was born on the 10th of July, 1911, in a modest terraced house at 53 Lichfield Grove, Finchley, North London. He was the fourth of 5 children born to Ernest Frederick Stevens, a managing director at Smithfield Market's butcher business and an amateur actor in his spare time, and his wife, Ellen Elizabeth Stevens, née Hoare. From his earliest days, young Tom, as his family called him, knew the sting of disappointment. He believed his parents had secretly hoped for a daughter in his place, a feeling that would follow him throughout his childhood. By the time Terry reached adolescence, the Stevens household had begun to crumble. Both parents had descended into alcoholism, their marriage failing in slow motion before their children's eyes. In a desperate attempt to bring them together, young Terry would perform impromptu slapstick routines at home, singing, dancing, and telling jokes with increasingly polished timing. The performances seldom worked. His father grew distant, retreating into himself, while his mother sought solace in drink. It was here, amid the wreckage of his parents' love, that Terry learnt the comedian's most essential skill, making people laugh when laughter seems impossible. At 13, Terry transferred to Ardingly College, a public school in Sussex, where he excelled at Latin, but was otherwise unremarkable. He left at 16 to work as a transport clerk at Smithfield Market alongside his father. In the workplace, young Stevens proved a natural clown, his gift for mimicry and timing earning him encouragement to join a local amateur dramatics group. He soon became a regular performer, discovering that the stage offered something his fractured home never could: approval without conditions, laughter without pain. By his early 20s, Terry had reinvented himself entirely. He deliberately shifted his accent from North London working class to the posh, upper-crust tones of matinee idol Owen Nares, believing, as he later said, that an educated voice made people look up to you. He took up ballroom dancing, found work as a film extra, and performed comedy monologues in nightclubs and cabaret. He experimented with stage names, briefly trying Motsnevitz, a backward spelling of Tom Stevens that attracted no attention whatsoever. Eventually, he settled on Terry Thomas, later adding the hyphen that he likened to the distinctive gap between his 2 front teeth, the gap that would become his trademark. His first paid engagement came on the 11th of April, 1930, at a social evening organised by the Union of Electric Railwaymen's Dining Club in South Kensington, where he was billed as Thos Stevens and earned 30 shillings. The audience was drunk and hostile, heckling him throughout, but he survived. By 1933, he'd secured an uncredited role in Alexander Korda's The Private Life of Henry VIII, his first taste of cinema. He left Smithfield Market to work briefly at an electrical shop before becoming a travelling salesman of electrical equipment, a job he loved because of the elaborate clothing he could wear while making his pitch. In his spare time, he played the ukulele with a local jazz band called the Rhythm Maniacs and took up dancing, forming a partnership with a sister of actress Jessie Matthews. By 1938, Terry Thomas's career was gathering momentum. He secured work performing at London's legendary Windmill Theatre, known for its nude revues, but also as a proving ground for comedians. Then, in September 1939, everything changed. Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. The theatres emptied as young men rushed to enlist. Terry Thomas joined the Entertainment's National Service Association, staging his own shows, including Cabaret Parade, and touring Britain to entertain troops. It was during this period, performing night after night for soldiers about to ship out to unknown fates, that he refined the mannerisms that would later become his stock in trade: the exaggerated diction, the theatrical pauses, the studied air of upper-class pomposity. But Entertainment's National Service Association work, however valuable, was not military service. In April 1942, Terry Thomas received his call-up papers. It would have seemed rather rude and ungrateful to refuse. He later wrote with characteristic understatement. He left Entertainment's National Service Association and reported to the Royal Corps of Signals training depot in Ossett, West Riding of Yorkshire, a world away from the stages and spotlights of London. The transformation from performer to soldier was jarring. Within 2 weeks of his arrival, signalman Stevens hired Ossett Town Hall and staged a concert, including a freshly written sketch about his feet suffering in army boots. The show was a hit with his fellow trainees. After basic training, he was promoted to corporal and applied for a commission, hoping to become an officer. His application was rejected. The duodenal ulcer he'd developed during training, combined with problematic hearing, saw him downgraded from A1 to B1 fitness at the start of 1943. He would rise no higher than sergeant. Then fate intervened. While appearing in cabaret and variety shows during his army service, including a performance at the Astoria Cinema in York, Terry Thomas was spotted by theatrical producer George Black. Black had recently established Stars in Battle Dress, an entertainment troupe composed entirely of serving military personnel, designed to boost morale. He saw something special in the gap-toothed corporal with the exaggerated voice and invited him to join. Stars in Battle Dress changed everything. Suddenly, Terry Thomas found himself among fellow entertainers, all wearing uniform yet sharing the same dream: to survive the war and return to the stage. His signature routine, Technical Hitch, became a highlight of the shows. In this sketch, he played a BBC radio announcer who had to cover missing records by impersonating absent singers. His remarkable vocal range spanning 4.5 octaves allowed him to imitate Noel Coward, Paul Robeson, Yma Sumac, Richard Tauber, and even the entire Luton Girls Choir. The routine brought down the house night after night, in garrison theatres across Britain, and later, as the war progressed, in liberated Europe. The tour with Stars in Battle Dress lasted several months, taking the troupe through Britain and into France, Belgium, and Holland as Allied forces pushed eastward. They performed in makeshift theatres, bomb-damaged town halls, and open fields anywhere soldiers could gather. The audiences were unlike anything Terry Thomas had known in civilian life. These men had seen friends die. They had lived through artillery barrages, machine gun fire, and burning cities. They needed laughter, not as entertainment, but as survival, a brief escape from the mud, the fear, and the trauma. Charlie Chester, the stand-up comedian who compared the shows, watched Terry Thomas refine his act night after night. The mannerisms grew sharper, the impersonations more precise. By the time demobilization approached, Terry Thomas had become one of the most prominent members of Stars in Battle Dress. He had learnt something no drama school could have taught him: how to read an audience under extreme strain, how to sense unspoken grief in a room, how to make people laugh when laughter itself was an act of defiance. As his service drew to a close, Terry Thomas took compassionate leave while, still receiving army pay, using the time to plan his return to civilian entertainment. When he was finally demobilized, he returned to a London transformed by war but hungry for laughter. In October 1946, he was appearing alongside Sid Field in Piccadilly Hayride at the Prince of Wales Theatre, a show that Graham McCann later described as the West End's biggest money spinner for years. Terry Thomas not only compared, but performed Technical Hitch and other sketches. Ivor Brown, writing in The Observer, remarked on the glorious rag of BBC modes, moods and intonations by Mr. Terry Thomas, a grand discovery. Within 3 weeks, he received an invitation to appear at the Royal Command performance on the 4th of November, 1946, at the London Palladium. The war had taken 6 years of his life and his youth, but it had given him something irreplaceable, an act forged in danger, comedy that carried the weight of genuine experience. Piccadilly Hayride ran for 778 performances, ending in January 1948. By then, Terry Thomas was established as one of Britain's premier comedians. His post-war career soared. He became the star of the first comedy series on British television, How Do You View, in 1949. He appeared on various BBC radio programmes and transitioned successfully into British films throughout the 1950s. His performances in Private's Progress, 1956, The Green Man, 1956, Blue Murder at St Trinian's, 1957, I'm All Right Jack, 1959, and Carlton Brown of the FO. 1959 showcased his talent for playing disreputable members of the upper classes, cads and bounders, whose pomposity concealed incompetence. His striking dress sense, monocle, waistcoat, and cigarette holder set off by the unforgettable gap between his front teeth made him instantly recognizable. By the early 1960s, Terry Thomas began appearing in American films, coarsening his already unsubtle screen persona but reaching a global audience. He appeared in Bachelor Flat, 1962, the massive ensemble comedy It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, 1963, and How to Murder Your Wife, 1965. He worked with European filmmakers on Le Grand Vadrouille, 1966, one of the most successful French films of all time, and took on multiple roles in numerous Italian productions. At his peak, Terry Thomas was one of the most recognizable British actors in the world, his gap-toothed grin and upper-class twit persona beloved across continents. Yet behind the laughter, shadows lingered. His personal life was turbulent, marked by failed relationships and later a devastating diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. As his health deteriorated through the 1970s and into the 1980s, work became scarce and then impossible. The disease robbed him of his ability to speak clearly, the very tool that had made his fortune. He faced financial difficulties despite his long career. Friends rallied to support him, organizing benefit performances to help cover his medical costs. Terry Thomas died on the 8th of January, 1990, aged 78, at a nursing home in Godalming, Surrey. He left behind a body of work that defined an era of British comedy and a legacy of making millions laugh. But for those who served with him in Stars in Battle Dress, who watched him perform in garrison theatres across war-torn Europe, he left something else. The memory of a gap-toothed sergeant who proved that even in the darkest times, laughter could be an act of defiance, a weapon more powerful than fear. Before the game shows and the slick one-liners, before he became the smooth-faced host of some of British television's most popular entertainment, Bob Monkhouse was Corporal Monkhouse of the Royal Air Force, a young clerk with a gift for deception, about to pull off one of the most audacious cons in military history. Not for personal gain, but for a chance to make people laugh. Robert Allen Monkhouse was born on the 1st of June, 1928, at 168 Bromley Road, Beckenham, Kent, into a world of comfortable middle-class prosperity. His father, Wilfred Adrian Monkhouse, was a chartered accountant, and his mother, Dorothy Muriel Monkhouse, née Hansard, presided over a household that wanted for nothing materially. Bob had an elder brother, John, born in 1922. His grandfather, John Monkhouse, was a prosperous Methodist businessman who co-founded Monk and Glass, makers of custard powder and jelly. On the surface, the Monkhouse family appeared to embody solid British respectability. Yet this comfortable childhood concealed a darker reality. Later accounts and documentaries would reveal that Bob and his brother John endured both physical and verbal harshness at the hands of their mother. Dorothy Monkhouse was a woman of rigid expectations and severe discipline. Bob learnt early to hide his true self behind a pleasing facade, to present whatever version of himself would avoid conflict while keeping his genuine feelings locked away. This survival skill, developed out of necessity in childhood, would serve him well in his career as a performer, but it would also contribute to accusations of insincerity that followed him throughout his professional life. Critics sensing the calculated nature of his charm without understanding its origins. Bob was educated at Goring Hall School in Worthing, Sussex, and then at Dulwich College in South London, one of Britain's most prestigious public schools. Founded in 1619, Dulwich had educated many notable Somersegs, figures, and its emphasis on academic excellence and sporting achievement was meant to prepare young men for leadership in business, the professions, or the armed forces. But Bob's interests lay elsewhere. Whilst his classmates focused on cricket and Latin, Bob discovered his twin passions, comedy and cartoons. While still at school, Bob began writing for popular British comics. He contributed jokes and gags to the Beano and the Dandy, two publications that had been entertaining British children since the 1930s, with anarchic humour and distinctive art styles. Bob also drew cartoon strips for other titles including Hotspur, Wizard, and Adventure. He was earning money from his creativity while still a teenager, a remarkable achievement that showed both his talent and his determination. Bob's comedy hero was Max Miller, known as the Cheeky Chappie, one of the biggest stars of British music hall. Miller was famous for his rapid-fire delivery, barely concealed innuendo, and his ability to work an audience into a frenzy of laughter. His act pushed boundaries, dancing on the edge of what was acceptable while maintaining a veneer of innocence. Bob studied Miller's technique obsessively, learning his timing, his rhythm, and his ability to make the audience complicit in the joke. Determined to meet his idol, 15-year-old Bob once stood in the rain for 3 hours at the stage door of a theatre in Lewisham, clutching a joke he had written about an old maid's drawers. When Max Miller finally emerged, Bob approached him nervously and pitched the joke. Miller listened, laughed, and paid the boy half a crown, 2 shillings and sixpence for the material. That night, Miller used Bob's joke in his act. Bob had made his first professional sale as a gag writer, and the experience was intoxicating. He had created something from nothing, made one of Britain's greatest comedians laugh, and been paid for it. Bob's academic career at Dulwich College came to an abrupt end when he was expelled for climbing the clock tower. The official reason was this act of rule-breaking, but it revealed something essential about Bob's character. Beneath the polished, obedient exterior was a rebellious streak, a willingness to take risks for the sheer thrill of it. He left school at 17 and began work as a cartoon film animator with Gaumont British, a job that allowed him to combine his artistic talents with his love of comedy and timing. He developed his craft systematically, studying what made people laugh, learning the mechanics of humour. Bob approached comedy the way an engineer approaches a machine, taking it apart to understand how it worked, then reassembling it with improvements. He kept notebooks in which he recorded jokes, routines, and observations about audience reactions. Even as a teenager, Bob was building what would become one of the most comprehensive archives of comedy material in Britain. Then, in 1946, shortly after his 18th birthday, Bob received his call-up papers. National service was compulsory for young British men, typically lasting 18 months to 2 years. The war in Europe had ended in May 1945, and the war against Japan had concluded in August that year. But Britain still maintained large military forces around the world, requiring a steady stream of conscripts to staff its garrisons and occupation duties. Bob was assigned to the Royal Air Force and, after basic training, was posted to London as secretary to Group Captain I.W. Thompkins, a neurologist and psychiatrist working in Royal Air Force Medical Services. It was an unusual posting for a young airman, but Bob's education and neat handwriting made him suitable for clerical work. As a clerk and typist, he had access to official Royal Air Force stationery, typewriters, and most importantly, documents that required the group captain's signature. Bob's daily work was competent but uninspiring. He typed reports on pilots' psychological fitness for duty, filed medical records, maintained appointment schedules, and performed the 1,000 small administrative tasks that kept military bureaucracy functioning. The work was steady, safe, and, for a young man burning with ambition, crushingly dull. Bob wanted to be on stage, making people laugh, building a career in entertainment. Instead, he was filing papers and typing memos about other people's difficulties. During his service, Bob appeared on Ralph Reeder's Gang Show, a radio program that showcased service personnel performing comedy and music. The gang shows, created during the war to boost morale, continued in peacetime as a way for talented servicemen to develop their skills. Bob's appearance on the gang show gave him his first real taste of performing for a wider audience. The experience was transformative. Standing at a microphone, delivering jokes he had written, hearing laughter ripple through the crowd, this, he realized, was where he belonged. There was, however, a serious obstacle. The BBC, Britain's only broadcaster and the gateway to any substantial entertainment career, had waiting lists for auditions that stretched over a year. Bob wrote requesting an audition, only to be told that he would have to wait at least 12 months before even being considered. For a young man impatient with the enforced delay of military service, a year might as well have been forever. The war was over, and Bob sensed that the entertainment industry was changing rapidly. Radio was expanding, television was emerging, and opportunities existed for those quick and brave enough to seize them. But he was stuck in uniform, typing medical reports for a group captain, with no clear path to the stage, and no connections to help him break through the BBC's bureaucratic barriers. Then Bob Monkhouse did something remarkable, something that required equal parts audacity, guile, and calculated risk. He committed what was technically a criminal offense in military law. He forged a letter in pursuit of his dream. Bob wrote a letter on official Royal Air Force stationery using his office typewriter. The letter explained that Corporal Monkhouse was a talented young performer who needed an audition with the BBC to support his confidence and morale. It stated that he had been performing for his fellow servicemen with considerable success, and that the Royal Air Force would be grateful if the BBC could accommodate this request. The letter framed the audition not merely as a personal favour, but as a matter affecting the welfare of Royal Air Force personnel. The letter was articulate, properly formatted, and entirely fraudulent. Bob had written every word himself. Now came the crucial part, getting Group Captain Tompkins to sign it. Bob slipped the letter into a pile of routine paperwork requiring the group captain's signature. Medical reports, supply requisitions, leave requests, administrative updates, dozens of documents crossed the desk each day, and most were signed quickly. The group captain was a busy man, dealing with the psychological aftermath of war and treating pilots suffering from combat stress and other mental health issues. He did not have time to read every document in detail. Bob placed his forged letter somewhere in the middle of the stack, neither at the top, where it might attract extra attention, nor at the bottom, where it might be set aside. He formatted it to resemble every other official communication, used the proper military terminology, and adopted the right tone of bureaucratic formality. The letter looked entirely legitimate. Group Captain Tompkins signed the entire stack of papers without noticing that one of them was a personal request from his clerk for a BBC audition. Bob retrieved the signed letter, carefully removed it from the pile, and posted it to the BBC. Then he waited. Within weeks, Bob received a reply. The BBC, responding to what they believed was an official request from a group captain in the Royal Air Force, agreed to grant Corporal Monkhouse an audition. The deception had worked perfectly. Bob's understanding of bureaucracy, his knowledge of how authority figures operated, and his willingness to take a carefully judged risk had paid off spectacularly. Bob auditioned for the BBC and impressed them sufficiently to be offered work as a comedy writer and occasional performer. By the time he was demobilized from the Royal Air Force in 1948, having completed his national service, he had already begun to establish himself in the entertainment industry. The letter he had forged and the signature he had obtained had opened a door that might otherwise have remained closed for years. It was far from ethical, and had it been discovered, could have resulted in serious punishment. But it was effective, and it revealed something essential about Bob Monkhouse's character. Beneath the smooth, proper exterior was a man prepared to bend rules in order to pursue his dream. After demobilization, Bob threw himself into the entertainment world with characteristic energy and focus. He formed a writing partnership with Dennis Goodwin, a fellow former Dulwich College student who shared his passion for comedy. Together, they built a remarkably successful partnership that would last for more than a decade. Monkhouse and Goodwin wrote for some of Britain's biggest radio comedy stars, including Arthur Askey, the diminutive comedian known for his catchphrase, "Hello, Playmates." Jimmy Edwards, the handlebar-moustached comic who specialized in blustering authority figures. Ted Ray, the violinist-turned-comedian known for his warmth and timing. And even Max Miller himself, Bob's childhood hero. The work was demanding radio comedy in the late 1940s, and the early 1950s required a constant stream of new material, but it was both lucrative and prestigious. In addition to writing for British stars, Bob and Denis became gag writers for American comedians touring Britain, most notably Bob Hope. When Hope needed jokes tailored for British audiences, references that would land with UK crowds, wordplay that worked in British English, Monkhouse and Goodwin supplied them. Working for Hope was both an honour and an education, showing Bob how American comedy operated at the highest professional level. Bob and Denis also performed as a double act, comparing shows on Radio Luxembourg and appearing in various radio programs. They developed a rapid-fire delivery, bouncing jokes off one another with practiced timing. But the partnership, successful as it was, could not last forever. In 1962, Dennis Goodwin ended their collaboration to work full-time for Bob Hope in America. It was an amicable parting. Denny had received an opportunity he could not refuse, but it meant Bob would now have to continue alone. By this time, Bob no longer needed a partner. He had established himself as a formidable talent. In 1956, he hosted Do You Trust Your Wife?, the British version of an American game show, his first major role as a television presenter. Bob proved a natural for the medium. His quick wit, his ability to think on his feet, his smooth and professional manner, and his apparently effortless ad-libbing made him perfect for television. Over the next several decades, Bob Monkhouse would host more than 30 different quiz and game shows on British television, becoming one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment. As his public profile grew, Bob also appeared in comedy films. In the late 1950s, he appeared in Carry On Sergeant, the very first film in what would become one of Britain's most successful comedy franchises. He later starred in Dentist in the Chair 1960 and Dentist on the Job 1961, ultimately regretting not committing more fully to the Carry On series rather than the dental comedies. The Carry On films went on to become iconic, while the Dentist films are now largely forgotten. In 1967, Bob began hosting The Golden Shot, a live entertainment show that combined comedy, celebrity guests, and a crossbow shooting game. The format was unusual but compelling. Studio contestants or viewers at home directed a blindfolded crossbow operator to shoot at targets, trying to win prizes. The show ran 52 weeks a year, was broadcast live, and regularly attracted audiences of up to 17 million viewers, extraordinary numbers that made Bob one of Britain's biggest television stars. Bob hosted The Golden Shot from July 1967 until January 1972, and then again from July 1974 to April 1975. His first tenure ended amid allegations which he consistently denied that he had accepted payments to feature certain branded goods on the program. The accusations were never proven, but they damaged his reputation and led to his replacement. When his successors, Norman Vaughan and Charlie Williams, failed to match his success, Bob was invited back, proof that audiences still wanted him regardless of tabloid controversy. Throughout the 1970s and the 1980s, Bob Monkhouse became synonymous with game shows and light entertainment. He hosted Celebrity Squares, Family Fortunes, Bob's Full House, and many others. His smooth professionalism, his ability to put contestants at ease, and his constant flow of ad-libs made him beloved by millions. Regular viewing figures exceeded 15 million for his most popular shows. Yet he was also criticized, particularly as comedy fashions changed in the 1980s. Younger comedians emerging from the alternative comedy scene viewed Bob as part of an older generation, too slick, too polished, too closely associated with traditional show business. His permanent tan under studio lights, his immaculate suits, his carefully styled hair, and ever-present smile all seemed, to some, like symbols of a dated era. Impressionists began mimicking him, and he became an easy target for those who preferred a rougher, more raw style of comedy. Behind the smooth facade, Bob's personal life was marked by turbulence and sorrow. He married Elizabeth Thompson in 1949, when he was just 21. They had 2 sons, Gary and Simon, and an adopted daughter, Abigail. Both sons died tragically in adulthood, losses that left a deep mark on Bob and that he spoke of with great sadness. He and Elizabeth separated in 1967 and divorced in 1972. His second marriage, to Jacqueline Harding in 1973, lasted until his death. In his autobiography, Bob admitted to numerous affairs over the course of his life, a revelation that surprised some readers but also revealed the complexity beneath his public persona. The smooth television host who appeared always in control was, in private, wrestling with insecurities and emotional needs that he never fully resolved. Bob Monkhouse was also a serious student of comedy, perhaps the most dedicated student British comedy has ever produced. He maintained meticulous joke books throughout his career, carefully handwritten volumes in which he recorded thousands of gags, sketches, and routines, all categorized and cross-referenced. These books were his most prized professional possession, the product of decades of work. When one of them was stolen in July 1995, Bob offered a £10,000 reward for its return. The book was eventually recovered after 18 months, demonstrating both the thief's conscience and the limited value of the material to anyone other than Bob himself. He was also a highly respected stand-up comedian, renowned for his ability to ad-lib. He became much in demand as an after-dinner speaker and wrote a book on the subject, Just Say a Few Words, which became a standard reference. His gift for working a room, reading the mood, adjusting his material in the moment, turning unexpected interruptions into comedy, was legendary among fellow performers. In the 1990s, Bob experienced a remarkable career renaissance. An appearance on Have I Got News for You, the satirical news quiz that epitomized the new, sharper British comedy, helped restore his popularity with younger audiences. His self-deprecating humour, his willingness to send up his own image, and his obvious intelligence won over many who had previously dismissed him. He demonstrated, on air, that beneath the polished game show host was a genuinely witty, quick-thinking comedian. Bob presented his own chat show, The Bob Monkhouse Show, in the mid-1980s, showcasing comedians of all generations. He used his platform to introduce British audiences to new American talent, including Robin Williams and Jim Carrey, long before some viewers realized how big they would become. Bob was known as a generous supporter of rising performers, someone who recognized talent regardless of age or style. In 2001, Bob was diagnosed with prostate cancer. The illness was serious, but Bob refused simply to retreat. He underwent treatment, continued to perform when he could, and used his experiences to help raise awareness, talking openly about men's health in interviews and public appearances. His determination to keep working and to keep making people laugh even while unwell spoke volumes about his devotion to his craft and his audience. Bob's final stand-up show took place at the Albany Comedy Club in London on 25 August 2003, just 4 months before his death. Among the audience were numerous British comedians he had personally invited, including Reece Shearsmith, John Culshaw, David Walliams, Fiona Allen, and Mark Steele. Bob delivered a brilliant, memorably sharp performance, a master comic entertaining his peers one last time. The show was recorded and later broadcast by the BBC, allowing new generations to see Bob Monkhouse at his very best. Bob Monkhouse died on 29 December 2003, aged 75, at his home in Eggington, near Leighton Buzzard, Bedfordshire. He died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family. His manager, Peter Pritchard, described him as one of the greatest comics England has ever produced. In 2005, in a poll to determine the comedian's comedian, Bob was ranked among the top 50 comedy acts of all time by fellow professionals, a testament to the respect he commanded from those who understood the difficulty of his craft. Bob was appointed an Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, in 1993 for his services to entertainment. In 1995, the British Comedy Awards honoured him with their Lifetime Achievement Award, and in 2003, just weeks before his death, the Television and Radio Industries Club presented him with a special award for outstanding contribution to broadcasting. After his passing, something remarkable happened that underlined his continuing impact. A public service advertisement he had filmed for prostate cancer awareness began airing on British television. In the advert, Bob spoke directly to camera about his illness, urging men to seek medical advice and early testing, delivering a serious message with his characteristic mixture of humour and warmth. It proved both moving and haunting, a final performance in which he used his fame to try to save lives. The campaign became one of the most memorable public health adverts in British television history. Looking back at Bob Monkhouse's extraordinary life and career, that forged letter stands as a defining moment. The young RAF corporal who slipped a falsified request into a pile of official documents was already Bob Monkhouse in miniature, ambitious, clever, willing to take calculated risks, determined to succeed even when the rules seemed to stand in his way. That letter was, in many ways, his first great performance, not on stage, but on paper. He wrote a script, cast himself in a role, understood his audience, and delivered exactly what they needed to read in order to give him what he wanted. The skills he used to create that letter, understanding people, crafting language carefully and making the difficult look effortless were the same skills that would later make him one of Britain's most successful entertainers. Before Hancock's half hour made him a household name, before his troubled genius reshaped the landscape of British comedy, Tony Hancock was an 18-year-old airman in the Royal Air Force Regiment, standing in the rain at an Royal Air Force base in Aberdeen, wondering whether his dream of making people laugh would survive the long, dark years of war. Anthony John Hancock was born on 12 May 1924 in Southam Road, Hall Green, Birmingham, where the house today bears a plaque commemorating his birth. He was the second of 3 sons born to Jack Hancock, who worked for a shipping firm, and Lily Hancock, daughter of a printer who served for 21 years as a director of Birmingham City Football Club. In April 1927, hoping to improve his health, Jack moved the family to Bournemouth, where they bought the Mayo Hygienic Laundry in Winton. A year later, they moved to the Railway Hotel in Holdenhurst Road, where Jack had become the licensee. Young, Tony grew up in the atmosphere of a public house, watching his father work as both hotelier and entertainer. Jack Hancock was a comedian and performer in his own right, and the hotel bar often rang with laughter and music. For Tony, the pub became a school of comedy, a place where he observed human nature in its most unguarded moments, where he learned the rhythm of humour and the art of timing. In the 1930s, the family bought Swanmore Villa and Lodge in Gervis Road, renaming it the Durlston Court Hotel after the Durlston Court Preparatory School. Then tragedy struck. In 1934, when Tony was just 10 years old, his father died. The loss devastated the family. Tony and his brothers, Colin and Roger Thomas, continued living at the hotel with their mother and stepfather, Robert Gordon Walker, but the boy had lost the man who taught him how to make people laugh. Some later suggested that the seeds of Tony's lifelong struggles were planted in this moment, and that he spent much of his life trying to fill the void his father left behind. Tony was sent to board at Durlston Court School in Swanage from 1936, then later attended Bradfield College in Reading, though he left school at the age of 15. Even as a young teenager, Tony showed a flair for performance, an instinct for comedy that came naturally. He began entertaining at local venues, telling jokes and shaping the persona that would later make him famous. The pompous, deluded everyman, convinced of his own importance, while the world quietly conspired to prove otherwise. When war broke out in September 1939, Tony Hancock was 15 years old, too young to enlist. He continued his early attempts at entertainment, performing in clubs and concerts, eventually seen by a BBC producer at a talent show. He secured a handful of radio appearances before the inevitable call-up arrived. In 1942, at the age of 18, Hancock joined the Royal Air Force Regiment, a ground-based force tasked with defending Royal Air Force installations. He was posted to Aberdeen, Scotland, far from the theatres and spotlights of southern England. The Royal Air Force Regiment was not known for glamour. While pilots won glory in the skies and bomber crews earned medals for daring raids, the regiment guarded airfields, manned anti-aircraft guns, and performed the uncelebrated but essential work of base defense. For a young man who dreamed of making people laugh, it must have seemed like exile, yet Hancock refused to let war extinguish his ambition. He auditioned for the Entertainment's National Service Association, hoping to transfer to one of its entertainment units. He was rejected. Undeterred, Hancock found another path. He auditioned for the Ralph Reeder Gang Shows, a series of variety revues that toured military bases throughout Britain and Europe. These shows, created by Ralph Reeder, a former Boy Scout commissioner turned theatrical producer, were designed to boost morale among servicemen. Reeder believed that soldiers should entertain their fellow soldiers, that laughter shared among comrades carried a meaning no civilian performer could replicate. Hancock was accepted into the gang shows, and suddenly his war changed. Instead of standing guard duty in the Scottish rain, he found himself travelling across Europe as Allied forces pushed back the German army. The gang shows performed wherever troops gathered in garrison theatres, mess halls, and bomb-damaged buildings. They brought music, comedy sketches, and variety acts to men who had seen friends fall, who lived under constant threat, who needed laughter not as diversion but as resilience. It was in the gang shows that Tony Hancock learned his craft. Night after night, he performed for audiences whose attention had to be earned, whose laughter was harder won than any civilian crowd. He learned to read a room instantly, to judge what kind of humor would work. For exhausted soldiers, what would fall flat, and how to recover when it did. He discovered that comedy was not about superiority, but about vulnerability, about showing what it meant to be human. The persona he would later perfect in Hancock's Half Hour, the pretentious fool undone by reality, was born in those wartime performances. The gang shows also introduced Hancock to other young performers who would shape post-war British entertainment. He met Peter Sellers, who was also serving in the Royal Air Force, and Dick Emery, another future comedy star. These young men, thrown together by war, formed bonds that would influence British comedy for decades to come. As the war in Europe drew to a close, the gang shows continued touring, now performing for occupying forces in liberated territory. They entertained troops in France, Belgium, Holland, and, eventually, Germany itself, bringing laughter to the ruins of the fallen Reich. Hancock saw the devastation of war firsthand: shattered cities, the displaced civilians, the cost of conflict. These experiences deepened his understanding of the relationship between humor and sorrow. When Hancock was demobilized in 1946, he returned to a Britain forever changed. The war had ended, but rationing continued, cities remained scarred, and an entire generation bore the psychological wounds of 6 years of conflict. Yet Britain was hungry for entertainment, desperate for reasons to laugh. Hancock returned to the stage, encouraged by his gang show experience. He worked as resident comedian at the Windmill Theatre and appeared in various stage shows and BBC radio programs such as Workers' Playtime and Variety Bandbox. His big break came in 1951 when he was cast in Educating Archie, a radio show featuring a ventriloquist's dummy as its star. Hancock's performance brought him national recognition, and his catchphrase, "Flippin' kids," became part of everyday British speech. That same year, he began making regular appearances on BBC Television's light entertainment programme Kaleidoscope. In 1954, the BBC gave him his own radio show, Hancock's Half Hour. Written by Ray Galton and Alan Simpson, whom Hancock had met while working on Happy-Go-Lucky, the programme became one of the most influential British comedies of its era. It ran for 7 years and more than 100 episodes. From 1956, it ran concurrently with an equally successful BBC television version. Hancock's Half Hour revolutionized British comedy, replacing the old variety format with story-driven situation comedy rooted in ordinary life. Hancock played Anthony Aloysius St. John Hancock, living at the now legendary address, 23 Railway Cuttings, East Cheam, a man forever striving for dignity, yet constantly undone by circumstance. He was pompous, deluded, exasperating, and deeply human. The television version, which aired from 1956 to 1961, made Hancock one of the biggest stars in Britain. Families gathered to watch episodes such as The Blood Donor and The Radio Ham, now regarded as masterpieces of British comedy, a study in timing, expression, and character. But behind the success, darker struggles took hold. Hancock's perfectionism grew overwhelming. In 1960, convinced that his collaboration with Sid James was turning them into a double act, he abruptly ended their partnership. The decision shocked fans, yet his final BBC series in 1961, performed solo, contained some of his most acclaimed work. Soon afterwards, he ended his partnership with Galton and Simpson, a move many regarded as disastrous. What followed was a long decline. Films such as The Rebel, 1961, performed well in Britain, but disappointed elsewhere. The Punch and Judy Man, 1963, struggled to find an audience. A new ITV series, Hancock, 1963, aired opposite Steptoe and Son and failed to match the brilliance of his earlier work. Throughout these difficult years, Hancock battled private struggles. The confidence seen on screen masked deep insecurity. He was married twice, first to Cicely Romanes from 1950 to 1965, then to Freddie Ross from 1965 onward. But personal relationships could not halt his decline, and friends watched as he became increasingly withdrawn. In 1968, seeking a fresh start, Hancock traveled to Australia to work on a new television series, Hancock Down Under, for the Seven Network. He hoped that distance from Britain would allow him to rebuild his career, but the emotional difficulties that had shadowed him did not remain behind. His life came to a premature end in June 1968 in Sydney, after years of personal struggle. He was 44 years old. For those who served with him in the Ralph Reeder gang shows, who watched him perform in garrison theatres across wartime Europe, Hancock left a different legacy. They remembered the young airman who made them laugh when laughter seemed impossible, who turned vulnerability into comedy that spoke to shared experience. That version of Tony Hancock, before fame and before the shadows, performing for his brothers in arms, remains the truest measure of his gift, the ability to find humour in hardship and to share it when it mattered most. He was not yet the sharp-tongued star of radio and carry-on fame. He was sapper Kenneth Williams, a Royal Engineers mapmaker in Bombay, learning that a well-placed voice, shaped with wit and precision, could lift weary soldiers' spirits in a world darkened by war. Kenneth Charles Williams was born on the 22nd of February 1926 in Bingfield Street, King's Cross, London, the only child of Charles Williams, a hairdresser, and Louisa Morgan Williams, a woman of vivacious temperament whom Kenneth adored. His relationship with his parents would prove key to the development of his personality and his art. He worshipped his mother, Lou, finding in her the warmth and encouragement that would sustain him through life's difficulties. His father, by contrast, was morose, selfish, and often cruel, a man whose disapproval hung over Kenneth like a constant shadow. Kenneth attended the Lyell Stanley Boys' Central Council School, a state-owned school near Mornington Crescent in Camden Town, North London. He was a bright student but showed no early inclination toward performance. Instead, he developed an interest in precision and detail, qualities that would serve him well in his future military service. After leaving school, he became apprenticed as a draftsman to a mapmaker, learning to translate the three-dimensional world onto two-dimensional paper with accuracy and care. His apprenticeship was interrupted by the Blitz, as German bombs rained down on London night after night in 1940 and 1941. Kenneth was evacuated to Bicester, and the home of a bachelor veterinary surgeon. This evacuation proved transformative. For the first time in his life, Kenneth experienced an educated, middle-class household, a world of books and conversation and refinement utterly unlike his working-class upbringing in King's Cross. He loved it. When he returned to London after the immediate danger passed, he brought something new with him, a carefully cultivated accent, no longer the harsh tones of his childhood, but something more polished, more refined. It was the beginning of Kenneth Williams's lifelong fascination with voice as identity, with the power of accent and inflection to transform oneself. In 1944, aged 18, Kenneth received his call-up papers. Britain had been at war for 5 years, and the nation's need for men was insatiable. Kenneth joined the British Army and was assigned to the Royal Engineers Survey Section as a sapper, the lowest rank for an enlisted soldier. His work was essentially the same as his civilian occupation, mapmaking. The Royal Engineers were responsible for creating and maintaining the detailed topographical maps essential for military operations, and Kenneth's training as a draftsman made him valuable. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Kenneth Williams did not see combat in Europe. Instead, in 1944, he was posted to the Far East, specifically to Bombay, India. The journey itself was an odyssey, weeks at sea on crowded troopships, the threat of U-boat attack constant, the heat intensifying as they passed through the Mediterranean and into the Indian Ocean. For a young man who had rarely left London, the voyage was both terrifying and exhilarating. Bombay in 1944 was a city of extremes, the jewel of British India, but also a place of grinding poverty, overwhelming heat, and cultural complexity that fascinated and bewildered the young soldiers arriving from Britain. Kenneth's work in the survey section was technically demanding but often tedious. He spent long hours in offices and workshops, translating aerial photographs and reconnaissance reports into maps, ensuring that coordinates were accurate, that terrain features were correctly represented, that the documents upon which lives depended were as close to perfect as humanly possible. The work required concentration and precision, qualities Kenneth possessed in abundance. Yet it also offered him something unexpected, camaraderie. In the close quarters of military life in India, thrown together with men from every corner of Britain, Kenneth discovered that his gift for mimicry, his ability to adopt accents and create characters, made him popular. He could imitate officers with devastating accuracy, could capture the essence of a person with just a few words in their voice. His fellow sappers found him hilarious. It was here, in the Royal Engineers Survey section in Bombay, that Kenneth Williams first stepped onto a stage. Combined Services Entertainment, known as CSE, was the military's entertainment organization in the Far East, equivalent to Entertainment's National Service Association in Europe. CSE units traveled throughout India, Burma, and the Pacific Theater, bringing shows to troops fighting in some of the war's most brutal conditions. They needed performers, and Kenneth auditioned. He discovered something remarkable. The same voice and mannerisms that made his friends laugh in the barracks could captivate an entire audience. On stage, Kenneth found freedom. He could be anyone, could adopt any voice, could create entire worlds with nothing but words and inflection. His nervousness disappeared behind the characters he created. His insecurities vanished when he made others laugh. Through CSE, Kenneth met two other young performers who would become lifelong friends and colleagues: Stanley Baxter, a fellow comedian who shared Kenneth's love of character work and vocal gymnastics, and Peter Nichols, who would go on to become one of Britain's most respected playwrights. The three young men formed a bond forged in the heat and hardship of wartime India, united by their discovery that entertainment was not just their passion but their calling. The shows Kenneth performed in were crude by professional standards, cobbled together with whatever materials could be scrounged, performed on makeshift stages in mess halls and open-air theaters. But to the soldiers who watched them, men who had been fighting in the jungles of Burma or preparing for the invasion of Malaya, these shows were precious. They represented normalcy, civilization, home. Kenneth learned that laughter in wartime carried a weight it never did in peace, that comedy could be an act of defiance against the brutality surrounding them. As the war drew to a close with Japan's surrender in August 1945, Kenneth remained in India with the occupation forces. He continued performing with CSE, honing his skills and building his repertoire. By the time he was demobilized in 1947, Kenneth Williams had made a decision. He would be an actor. Returning to Britain, Kenneth threw himself into repertory theatre, that grueling training ground where actors learned their craft by performing different plays week after week, sometimes rehearsing one play during the day while performing another at night. He worked in repertory companies across Britain, taking roles ranging from Shakespeare to contemporary drama, learning technique and discipline, discovering his range. But it was radio comedy that made Kenneth Williams a star. In the early 1950s, he was cast in Hancock's Half Hour, the groundbreaking radio series that defined a generation of British comedy. Kenneth played a rotating cast of characters, each with distinctive voices and mannerisms, from the affected aesthete to the working-class spiv. His versatility was astonishing, his timing impeccable. He became one of the show's most valuable assets, though his relationship with Tony Hancock would later sour, leading to Kenneth's departure from the series. Throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s, Kenneth Williams became one of the most recognizable voices in British entertainment. He was a regular panelist on the radio show Just a Minute, where his quick wit and theatrical outrage made him a fan favorite. He appeared in reviews and variety shows, always bringing his unique blend of camp humor and sharp intelligence. Then came the Carry On films, the series of bawdy British comedies that defined an era. Kenneth appeared in 26 Carry On films between the late 1950s and the late 1970s, becoming one of the series' most iconic performers. His characters, whether camp, pompous, or both, became beloved fixtures. His catchphrases, infamy, infamy, they've all got it in for me, and ooh, no, stop messing about, entered the language. Yet Kenneth often expressed ambivalence about the Carry On films, feeling they represented a limitation on his talents, that he was capable of more serious work. This tension, between Kenneth's gifts and his opportunities, between his ambitions and his circumstances, marked his entire career. He was a brilliant performer who never received the recognition he felt he deserved. He was gay at a time when homosexuality was illegal in Britain, living with a secret that caused him profound distress. His diaries, published posthumously, reveal a man of extraordinary intellect and sensitivity, struggling with depression and sexual repression, unable to find peace. Kenneth Williams never married, never found a lasting relationship, lived alone in a flat in central London. He maintained close friendships, particularly with his mother Lou, with whom he remained extraordinarily close throughout her life. But he was essentially solitary, a man who found it easier to adopt characters than to simply be himself. On the 15th of April 1988, Kenneth Williams passed away at his home in central London. The coroner recorded an open verdict, unable to determine the precise circumstances of his death. He was 62 years old. His diaries, published in 1993, revealed the depth of his unhappiness, the loneliness that haunted him, the sense that life had somehow passed him by despite his success. Yet for those who served with him in the Royal Engineers Survey section in Bombay, who watched him discover his voice on CSE stages across India, Kenneth Williams represented something else. A young man who found his calling in the midst of war, who turned his gift for mimicry into an art form, who made thousands of soldiers laugh when they needed it most. That young sapper, crouched over maps by day and creating characters by night, remains the truest version of Kenneth Williams, before fame complicated everything, before success brought its own forms of suffering. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Cinema Peak for more true stories from the wars that shaped our world.